If I were a superstitious man, I would advise you to be careful what you call your space missions. When Russia named its first mission to the moon in 47 years, it was originally given the designation Luna-Glob, translating in English to Lunar Sphere. However, this name troubled the scientific director of the Space Research Institute of the Russian Academy of Sciences, Lev Zeleny. Glob was too similar to a different Russian word, grob, meaning coffin. Zeleny changed the name of the mission to Luna-25, intending to call back to the earlier Soviet Luna missions, which were the last time Russian spacecraft successfully landed on the moon. But perhaps it was too late, and something of that original name lingered. We now know that Lunar Coffin was a much more apt name for the ill-omened Luna-25. I'm Alex McColgan, and you're watching Astrum. Join us today as we explore the fate of Russia's first moon mission since 1976. For the country that once led the world in the space race, what exactly went wrong? Although we often look at NASA or ESA missions here at Astrum, Russia's space program has historically also been quite the powerhouse. Back when Russia was part of the USSR, it was the Soviet Union's launch of Sputnik 1, the first artificial satellite, that triggered the space race in 1957, and for a time, the Soviet space program went from strength to strength. It was the Soviet Union that put the first man into space and the first woman, the first multi-person crew, the first dog. Their rockets escaped the Earth-Moon system first, impacted the moon first, orbited the moon first, and took photos of the far side of the moon first. The Soviet cosmonauts did the first spacewalk. The USSR launched the first space station. To the eyes of many, and the pleasure of Soviet leadership, the USSR was winning the space race. But beneath the surface, not everything was going as smoothly as it appeared. The Soviet Union also saw the first death during a space mission when the re-entry capsule's parachute of cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov failed to open on his re-entry to Earth. The only 3 men to have died in space were a crew of Soviet cosmonauts visiting that first ever space station. Soviet launches were plagued with failures, but eager to look good in the eyes of the world, particularly compared to its rival, the US, the USSR simply didn't report any of its failed lunar missions. It pretended that any rocket that didn't make it out of the atmosphere was never intended to be a moon mission at all. In reality, only about 34% of Soviet moon missions succeeded, in comparison to America's 60% success rate on equivalent missions. America landed the first man on the moon in 1969. And after that crowning achievement, both superpowers seemed to lose interest in continuing the race, refocusing their space programs towards non-lunar pursuits by the mid-1970s. Soviet cosmonauts never set foot on the moon itself. The USSR cancelled any of its plans to do so, as the endeavor was ultimately seen as too expensive. Perhaps more importantly, what was the point of going if you were only going to get there second? But with the turn of the millennium, and since the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, the world's interest in going to the moon has been rekindled. Scientists realized that the moon would make a good stepping stone for a human space mission to Mars due to its plentiful resources, such as newly discovered water ice, ideal for rocket fuel, air and water, and low gravity. Resources on the moon began to attract the attention of businesses for economic reasons, and nations began to consider setting up permanent bases on its surface as a way of turning a profit. And of course, there is still a lot of science to be done there, attracting those who wish to learn more about the processes by which the moon formed and the cycles that govern it. Russia's old rival, the USA, rose and began to dust off their space programs. America started its Constellation program in 2005, declaring its aim to go back to the moon. But now, other nations were getting in on the act too. India, which had not been part of the first race for the moon, began its Chandrayaan program for lunar exploration in 2000. Governments across the world believed that the benefits of going to the moon in this second rush were so great that nations that didn't go would in some way fall behind. In the words of ISRO chairman Krishna Swamy Kasturirangan, it is not whether we can afford it, it is whether we can afford to ignore it. Russia didn't intend to be left behind. It was eager to pick up the Soviet legacy of space exploration, and in fact it beat its competitors to the punch. Russia had already begun thinking about a new lunar mission as early as the mid-1990s, when Russian scientists Mikhail Marov and Eric Galimov put forward their proposal to Roscosmos, Russia's newly restructured space agency. Their Luna-Glob mission was approved and was initially intended to have a lot more parts to it, including a penetrator for seismic sounding, a lander, and an orbiter. However, the project initially did not have enough political will behind it. It faced budget cuts after the Russian financial crisis of 1998, when the ruble lost over 2/3 of its value in 3 weeks, and was mired in delays that repeatedly knocked it back and put it on hold. The penetrator and orbiter were scrapped, leaving just the lander, as the plan for the mission was reimagined to make it more economical. Russia wanted to be a nationally recognized player in the space game, but didn't want to spend massive amounts of its budget on the plan. In 2005, Russia only invested 20 billion rubles, about 0.7 billion USD, in its space industry, compared to the USA's $15.6 billion. One way to work around this was to collaborate with other nations. Russia initially tried to work with India on the Chandrayaan-2 mission in 2007. Luna-25 would fly with India's orbiter and be the mission's lander. However, this slow spending ultimately punished them, and Russian scientists were unable to get the lander's technology working in time for the initial 2013 launch date. India eventually abandoned the collaboration and completed Chandrayaan-2 on its own. Russia was left trying to get Luna-25 to the moon's surface solo. India's Chandrayaan-2 lander crashed into the moon, but India was eager to try again with Chandrayaan-3. This set Russia and India on a course from collaborators to competitors. Both Russia and India were interested in the moon's south pole, where Chandrayaan-2 and others had confirmed through spectrometry the presence of water ice. Luna-25 and Chandrayaan-3 were now racing to be the first landers to successfully touch down on the moon's south pole and potentially discover that water firsthand. However, Russia faced a new problem: the invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Western countries were outraged at Russia's decision to attack its neighbor and came together to impose massive sanctions. Not only was this painful economically, but one vital element of these sanctions was a ban on the trade of high-end computer chips and components. These would prevent Russia from developing high-precision ballistic rockets for use in its military, but they would also hit Russia's lunar goals. European scientists began ending their collaborations with Roscosmos. In an interconnected world where Russia traded for much of its high-end components, Russia would now have to go it alone. India completed Chandrayaan-3 and launched it on July 14, 2023, a mission we covered in greater detail in a previous video. However, the route that they took to the moon was a fuel-efficient but time-inefficient one. It would take over a month to arrive on the moon's surface. India estimated a touchdown date of August 23rd. If Russia really hurried, it could complete its lander and arrive before India by taking a shorter, more fuel-intensive route using Russia's powerful Soyuz 2-1B rocket. The Luna-25 mission had by this time been delayed from 2021 to 2022 and then to 2023. In a bad stroke of luck for Russia, its BIB navigation sensor didn't pass quality tests. This was problematic as the BIB sensor relied on a computer chip normally supplied by the West, a chip that Russia could no longer purchase due to Western sanctions. So Russian scientists had to develop a new one on their own, the BioCell. Luna-25 was cleared for launch on August 11, 2023. It had 8 Russian scientific instruments on board, including laser mass spectrometers, infrared spectrometers, cameras for imaging the lunar surface, and even a device for measuring dust and micrometers. Luna-25 would operate on the moon's surface for a whole year. enduring the cold of lunar nights and the intense solar radiation of lunar days. It had the potential to do some good science. The Soyuz rocket was powerful enough that it would get Luna-25 to the moon's surface by August 21st, 2 crucial days before India's lander arrived. Russia would indeed win the race against its rival. Luna-25 launched successfully from the Vostochny Cosmodrome on August 11, 2023 and entered the moon's orbit on August 16th. It took photographs of the moon's surface, imaging the Zeeman crater. All systems were functioning normally and communications were good. Russian scientists then began to make final preparations for the landing itself. The south pole of the moon is home to some treacherous terrain, and the scientists didn't want a rough touchdown, which could potentially harm Luna-25. But then something went wrong. On August 19th, Luna-25 lost communications with Earth. No longer guided remotely, Luna-25 attempted to perform the pre-planned maneuver that would take it from a circular orbit around the moon into the new path down toward the surface. However, further failures occurred. The biocell navigation device, the one developed by Russian scientists after the previous one, hadn't passed quality control tests, sent bad information to the ship's onboard control unit. As a result, the thrusters fired for 127 seconds instead of the intended 84 seconds, pointing Luna-25 into a steeper and steeper descent. On the 20th of August, Luna-25 careened down toward the moon's surface at a pace too fast to stop. Roscosmos scientists could do nothing but look on in horror as the lander hurtled into the terrain, traveling faster and faster. Although no external cameras witnessed the impact, it's easy to imagine the grim result of acceleration under gravity that turned Luna-25 back into a lunar coffin. Its lunar mission had not lasted a year, but only a few days. NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter did a flyby later, taking an image of the site of the craft's final resting place. Luna-25 had impacted hard, creating a crater about 10 meters in diameter. Russia had attempted to show the world that it was still a great power when it came to space exploration. However, Luna-25 had been mired by pressures and challenges. Western sanctions had indirectly sabotaged it. The Russian replacement chip was not precise enough or hard enough to survive the high radiation environment of space. However, Russia's attempt to beat its rival India had also created problems for itself. When I learned about its arrival date being 2 days before India, it reminded me of a similar time when the Soviet Union's Luna-15 mission crashed into the moon only a few hundred miles, and on the same day as Apollo 11 landed. Luna-15 had been tasked with collecting moon rocks, the same as the astronauts of Apollo 11, although it was unmanned. If America's mission had failed, it would have been a point of pride to the Soviet Union that Luna-15 had managed to steal America's thunder. This was political point scoring. The Soviet Union didn't want to just get to the moon, it wanted to get there first. And inevitably, when you're racing to beat someone else, you take less time making sure everything works as well as it needs to. And so, you run a greater risk of failure. Ultimately, just like with Luna-15, Russia's Luna-25 had the opposite effect that its country's leadership intended. Rather than show Russia's superiority in space exploration, it showed the downsides of isolationism and rivalry over collaboration. If Russia were still working with institutions like ESA and sharing in technological advances, perhaps it would be boasting success right now.